Welcome to another episode of Badges to Briefcases. I'm your host, Attorney Brandon Gans, and with me I've got co-host, Attorney Danielle Padilla. Good morning. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. So before we get started, remember to follow us on all our socials, Gans_Law. So Danielle, today's topic is going to be one that I think a lot of people don't realize comes up often, but it actually does: mental health.
Absolutely.
Okay. This is something that I think we've both seen in our careers in law enforcement and then now as criminal defense attorneys, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's something that I think impacts people from a routine traffic stop all the way up through the arrest and booking process and then through the court system. Right?
Absolutely.
So before we get started, I do want to talk about your background a little bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're both in law enforcement, but you have some accolades that I don't. Just tell me a little bit about the special training and certification you had in mental health.
Yeah. So during my time being a police officer at Kissimmee Police Department, I received a special training, crisis intervention. I was part of the crisis intervention team, essentially. It was just myself for the entire platoon that had this extra certification on mental health, and how that plays out, with law enforcement, how it plays out in the legal field when it comes to, criminal charges, the criminal case, and all those things. So I was specially trained to identify these signs and these cues. Do we have a person who is going through a mental health crisis, or do we have a person who is just committing a crime and we need to just look at it more from a legal aspect
Right.
and not a mental health aspect?
Right. And I remember when I was in law enforcement, we obviously not everyone is CIT or trained in mental health. So we would have to call out, especially people like yourself.
Right,
They come
right.
in and
Yep.
they've got a little pin on the uniform, it says CIT, and then they know,
Yeah.
okay, this one of you take over from here.
Right.
So you're kind of the person that we would call
Absolutely.
to help out.
Yes.
Say help us with the direction. Because, in law enforcement, you're enforcing the laws.
Yeah.
But when you add mental health to the picture, it's a completely new dynamic. Right?
Completely different. And I think that people are not aware of that, right? There's different ways that law enforcement can handle a situation. The end all be all answer is not always slap cuffs and go. There's other options, and that's why it's so important that law enforcement be trained in these areas so that they know what these signs are and they can take appropriate action. But unfortunately, the only way to be able to have this knowledge is, number one, sending more officers to these type of trainings, and number two, spreading the word, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as law enforcement, when you arrive on a call, you may not always know that there's a mental health crisis occurring.
Correct.
Right? Sometimes you do because 911 dispatch will get that information, but sometimes you don't find out until you're in it, right?
Absolutely.
So does that change how you would handle a call?
Absolutely. I think you go in there sometimes with limited information, and then you have to adjust. And I think part of it is, number one, seeing the signs. Number two, asking the right questions to whoever is on scene, especially if you have friends or family that can possibly hold information that can be valuable for you to tailor your approach. And so sometimes I would get to scenes and realize, I don't think that this is really what dispatch thought it was. Let's kind of start asking some more tailored questions and dig a little deeper. And sometimes those answers would then, make me change my approach as to how I was going to resolve that incident.
Yeah, you have to pivot on the fly,
Pivot.
which is a lot of what law enforcement is. And even now as lawyers, sometimes you get some new evidence and you got to pivot and say, okay, we're going to do this now.
Absolutely.
So did you see any additional or associated risks when you were dealing with a mental health crisis?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's one thing we all know, it's law enforcement's job is very, very dangerous. I don't ever say that lightly. Very dangerous. You can be dispatched to one thing and then it's really something else. But when you add an extra layer of mental health, it can really escalate things pretty fast. I know that in my experience, I had a couple of situations that escalated very fast, and became very dangerous. Early into my CIT, experience and taking care of these big garage calls and doing these things, I ran into an incident that escalated very fast. I thought that I was being dispatched to a domestic disturbance, between family members and a person. And quickly did I realize, this is not just a domestic argument, domestic disturbance, disagreement. This is mental health. And it took me just 3 seconds when I had someone dodging at me with a knife to realize there's more to this than that. And unfortunately, law enforcement, sometimes we walk in and we're not well braced with that information on the front end. So you have to pivot, like you said, and then you have to change your plan. So I think that as I got there and I saw these things playing out, I had to change my approach, change my mentality. And had I not done that, that call could have ended very, very different. And I was very, very proud of not only myself, but everyone who was on that scene for how we chose to handle it. Because yes, it was a dangerous situation. Yes, it could have been a deadly, dangerous situation. However, we got to the root of the problem, which was mental health. And we're all able to, in essence, come out safe, but also be able to help someone who was in need.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know we've all had those experiences too. I remember going out to a call where the call that the mother called that her son threw a laptop at her head, which I was like, okay, wow. But it wasn't until I got on the call and assessed and I said, okay, there's a mental health aspect to this, which did change my response as to just an upset teenager that threw a laptop at his mom's head. That okay, there's more to this story, so I had to kind of change now. And even though he did resist and we had to go hands on and everything, um even though physical resistance, you could, technically you could tase,
Yes.
chose not to do that because again, the mental health, it just changed my behavior. Normally, if physical resistance, you're going to tase the person or take some other method. Chose not to. Again, just hands on, got him in cuffs. He ended up running on me, and I had to gently redirect him. But
Okay.
but when you're dealing with someone like that, you don't want to use excessive. You never want to use excessive, but you just have to take that into account, I think. And fortunately, you had some extra special training, which allowed you to probably go above and beyond.
Definitely. Part of the training that I received is, getting coached and taught by many, many, many mental health experts, psychologists on what are those warning signs? What are the questions to ask when you're getting on scene? You know, um, what can cause someone to end up in a situation like this? Because what I would find is oftentimes family members telling me, I don't know. I've never seen this behavior. But then when you start asking the right questions, you realize, wait a minute, this and this thing just happened to this person. And that kind of triggered their mental health and put them to, in this sliding depression that they're in now, and triggers a lot of things. So sometimes it's about asking the right questions. People think, oh, mental health, it's kind of there from the inception of someone's life, but that's not true. Sometimes it just, like I've said before, it goes dormant, and then it can take a life altering event that happens to that person to trigger it and activate it. And then you're seeing it full on, and it can confuse family members, but it's so important to ask those key questions.
Have you ever had a call like that falls into that
Absolutely.
category?
Yes, I did. So I had a incident where I had a mom calling 911, and the person that she was having a hard time with was her son. And her son did, fortunately, he attacked her, unfortunately, and it was a laundry list of things he tried to do to her. But in the end, he battered her, and she was able to get away. We arrived. He took off. We were able to locate him. Um, and right away, I mean, this was mental health. I could not hold a conversation with him. He was speaking to me in codes, just reciting numbers over and over again. And I said, something's going on here. So I started digging, asking more questions. And I said to mom, is this his normal behavior? Is this just today? How has he been in the previous days? And she said to me, a year ago, his father passed away and he's never been the same. And it's just progressively getting worse. So then I asked, okay, is he on medications? Has he been under the care of a psychiatrist? Is there any? And there was none of that. She said, no, I've just been hoping he would snap out of it. And unfortunately, that's not how things work, and I think that after that incident, she realized, my God, my son needs help. And we were able to get him that help. And that is the situation that if you don't have properly trained law enforcement, it could have been an arrest.
Yeah.
It could have been an arrest. And I'm not saying that the law is not going to, in some form, address those actions, but those actions can be addressed differently. It doesn't always have to be a slap of the cuffs.
So what are some other options if, like, say you have someone that's dealing with a mental health crisis and they're harmful or about to be harmful?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the two questions that we're always asking is, are they a harm to themselves or potentially a harm to someone else? And if one of those things can be met, then will be able to apply the criteria for a Baker Act. And a Baker Act and here in the state of Florida gives, them 72 hours to evaluate that person and deem if there is a true mental health crisis going on and whether that's going to require treatment, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, and medication. And there's more procedures that go way more in depth, but it begins there, right? And let's say if you do choose as law enforcement to take the Baker Act road because you believe this is attributed to mental health, then as far as whatever alleged crimes were committed, you have other options such as forwarding those charges to the state attorney's office, which then will trigger them to see the Baker Act affidavit that you type up, and the picture starts making a lot more sense.
Right. And for those of that are listening that don't know what a Baker Act is, I know a lot of people do, but it's a custodial maneuver, but it's not an arrest, right?
Yeah.
So you are taking them to a facility, like you said, for 72 hours.
And so,
If
And
they're voluntary, I mean,
Yeah.
they don't get to choose.
yeah, they do have now, as law enforcement, we do have the option where we've had individuals call that will tell you, I know that I am a risk to myself. I am not in a good place. And if I am not given help, yeah, something bad will happen. And in those instances, we call that a voluntary, Baker Act, and they can opt to voluntarily commit themselves to that process and go under an evaluation because maybe they're realizing something internally is going wrong. But unfortunately, there's instances where that person is not able to make that determination for themselves. So that would classify as an involuntary Baker Act.
Yeah. And I've gone to a similar call where someone was having a mental health episode. They called us, I want to be Baker acted. The only difference is, unlike in your situation, they didn't say that they were going to be a harm to themselves or others. So they just weren't saying the magic words. And I was asking the questions, but we weren't just getting, I think they just liked the idea. I want to be Baker acted, but I couldn't take them because they didn't meet the criteria.
Absolutely, because in essence, even though they're volunteering themselves to that process, they're being held for 72 hours in a facility under evaluation. So you can only, imagine how the law is implicated in a situation like that. So yeah, law enforcement is put in a position where certain criteria, certain trigger words have to be said in order for those actions to be taken. I think that the community sometimes confuses voluntary Baker Acts for, you know, trying to get an appointment with a psychologist, because they look at it like I'm going to be evaluated. If I submit myself to this process, I'll see a psychiatrist. They'll tell me a diagnosis. They'll give me medication. But unfortunately, that's not the way to go. There has to be an imminent threat in that moment to that person or to someone around them in order for them to make a decision like that or for law enforcement to make the decision for them.
Right, exactly. And I know we've talked a lot about what, our experience in law enforcement with mental health. But oftentimes there's an overlap where the person does get arrested and gets charged criminally, either by direct arrest or, like you said, filing with the state attorneys and they pick up the charges. And now they're dealing with the other side, which is what we're doing now as defense attorneys. So, how often do we see mental health being a factor in criminal cases?
Many times. And it's very important that a defense attorney picks up on those cues too, right? Law enforcement has cues they pick up on, but as defense attorneys, we do too when we're having these conversations. And it's very important to see if a person, in essence, is able to understand the nature of the criminal proceedings that are being brought against them, right?
Absolutely.
And if they're not able to, then how could you subject someone essentially to the process of a criminal case and being prosecuted when they're not able to diligently make decisions for themselves? And that's where we come and we protect their rights and their mental health.
Absolutely. You have to be competent to stand trial.
Absolutely.
So, and that's a whole process that we deal with all the time.
Yes.
But like you said, looking at a case, I can look at a police report. And one of the things that I look for, among others, is sometimes lack of motive.
Yeah.
You know, most crimes have a motive.
Yeah.
So I remember representing an individual, 17, 18, and ended up punching through the window of a daycare and obviously scaring the kids. The glass broke. It was pretty bad on paper. There's absolutely no motive. He just did it. And then some of the statements they make to the police have become nonsensical. Um, and so when you start going down that track, and of course, talking to family, when the parents have to say everything. So there's just so many factors that can trigger to look at that. And then like you said, you have to think about, okay, was this person insane at the time they did the crime?
Right.
And we're talking like not guilty by reason of insanity,
Right.
or are they just not competent to stand trial? Which again, we could do a whole episode on that and the
Yeah.
process. Would this person qualify for mental health court, which is a great way to try and get the charges dropped, or just talking to the prosecutor.
Correct, correct. I agree. And you said something that's really important, which is talking to family. And unfortunately, we still live in a world where mental health has such a stigma attached to it. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with family members where I'm breaking down to them what I'm seeing. And I'm saying, I think there is a mental health issue here, and we need to preserve their rights, and we need to get the ball rolling here. And so many times I've had families say to me, I kind of knew deep down inside, but I just, because of embarrassment, because of, not knowing where to turn to for help, I just didn't get them the help that they needed. And had I done that, they wouldn't be in jail right now. And it's really hard to hear that, because in essence, you're hearing these family members almost carry a guilt, right? Carry a guilt that they didn't get their loved one help sooner to avoid, going down this path. But I always tell them, fortunate for them, right? That as defense attorneys, that's where we come in to basically assist them to be able to ease this process and guide them in this process to get their loved one the help and the right counsel and assistance during the life of the case. So
Yeah, you see family being guiltful because they didn't get the family member help, or even guilty that they even call 911, which is really sad, because you're in a imminent dangerous situation, and then feeling bad, had I not called 911, they would not have gotten arrested. But um, it's easy to look back and say that hindsight is 2020, but it's a very difficult situation
it's
for all
very
Americans.
difficult. It's very difficult, especially when they don't know where to turn to for help, or if finances are an issue. I mean, there's just so many layers to it.
Right.
But that's why it's very important as defense attorneys that we ask these questions, because although maybe the family didn't do those things on the front end, there's definitely things that we can step in and do to still
Right.
protect their rights.
Right. And as attorneys, we have to, be tactical and notify the state attorney. The prosecutor may not be aware that there's mental health issues, and the judge may not be aware. Most of the time, the judges are not even familiar with the file in general.
Absolutely.
But we have to inform them. It can impact not just the case, but other collateral issues like bond matters. I had a case, for example, that was all over the local news. It was a big deal. The judge posted a $60,000 bond, or assigned a $60,000 bond on a misdemeanor, which is like unheard of.
Wow.
Yes,
Nasty.
because she thought it was a political crime, and I was able to convince the judge down at the jail that this was actually a mental health issue. And I presented the evidence, the witnesses, the documentation, documented history, and the judge was so convinced she released my client without putting up any money.
Look at that.
And so just putting the judges on notice that, hey, this is not what you think it is. There's more to the story here. Can have a huge impact.
Absolutely. And at least, in my experience, I've seen that once you do put judges on notice, like I've heard, things that being said like, oh, the judges don't care. They care. They care, and they want to be informed of these things. And they are open to hearing counsel making these arguments and apprising them of this information. And it's up to a diligent defense attorney to bring that information to the table. That's the only way the prosecutor is going to get it, the judge is going to get it, and we're going to be able to, move forward accordingly. So they are more than willing to hear the arguments, but it's up to a diligent defense attorney to bring them.
Right. And I would imagine the prosecutors listen to you especially well because you have your CIT.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there was definitely many times where I had to have conversations, and sometimes that's all it takes is just a conversation with the, assistant state attorney on the case, and laying out the facts, and showing them, and it can change a lot. It can be a big game changer when you provide that information to them, especially when they know that you have extra additional training and experience. And those are things that I would bring to the table and outline to them, like, listen, I'm not coming with just a meritless, argument of this is what I think. This is what I think, and it's because of these facts. And additionally, I know because I've been trained in this and this and this.
Mhm. I wonder if the system in general, the criminal justice system, prosecutors, courtrooms, judges, and even police could do a better job of dealing with these issues.
I believe so. I believe that there is not much funds being invested into these type of trainings. At least during the time that I was in law enforcement, I know that it was not a training that was, being offered often. When, like I said, when I went, I was the only one chosen to go to this training. No one else on my squad, no one else in my platoon, and so it was almost like a privilege and honor to be able to get this, extra training. But man, do I wish that it could be, given more, to more police officers, and even in the courtroom, like you're saying.
Yeah, especially given the amount of overlap. And again, I know we started the episode by saying I don't think a lot of people even think about this, but we see it so often. And police dealing with, transients. I mean, how that's almost always mental health.
Yes.
And there's so much overlap.
Absolutely.
And, it's interesting. I wonder if sometimes the criminal justice system has become a default system for mental health,
Yeah.
because it feels that way sometimes.
Absolutely. I think that it becomes a system where when it comes to mental health, there's no winning. There's no winning, especially if you're not having a defense attorney advocating for you and protecting your rights. Because like I said, you have to be competent to be able to stand these proceedings. And if you're not, then it's holes. So my thing is, it seems like when these things are not addressed on the front end, the person is on the losing end, because what's going to happen is, and you've seen it, we've all seen it, it's just the state attorney's not going to be aware. The judge is not aware. So guess what happens? They end up in jail, especially, if they're homeless. It's mental health. You see it a lot, with transients, and they end up in jail. They can't bond out. So guess what that turns into? Credit time served. They sit in jail for a while. They get released. Week later, happens again. They're back.
But with a longer record.
Yes.
Because now
And again and again and again, it just continues to happen. But the root of the issue is not being addressed at that point. So it's almost like a cycle that doesn't end until someone steps in and protects that person's rights.
Right, absolutely. And the criminal justice system, I mean, yeah, I have had people found not guilty by reason of insanity. It's very rare. People, I think people are getting away with crimes all the time. You just plead, I was insane. It's not that
No,
easy.
it's not.
I mean, you're talking about a very long process, expert witnesses, multiple evaluations. There's a lot of factors that go into it, tons of case law addressing the issue. More commonly, you do see mental competency. But again, that's not going to make the case go away either. And so, yes, we have mental health court, which is a great thing.
Absolutely.
I think it's wonderful. It's a wonderful tool. Um, but just because you're deemed to have a mental health issue doesn't mean the charge just gets dropped
No.
most of the time,
No.
unless we can be very convincing.
Correct.
But most of the time, even if you get into the program and you qualify and you're eligible, you then have to complete the program,
Absolutely.
which, if you have mental health, may not be the easiest thing to do.
Correct.
Now, they do take that into account and are, factor it in, but it's a process. You have to keep
Very long.
going back every few weeks. You go to court and participate,
Yeah.
and we see people have some issues with that. Obviously,
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the problem, even the other problem is that most people really don't realize is mental health is fluid. So sometimes the competency can be there and sometimes it's not. And so I've seen cases where they begin and they're found not competent. 6 months into it, they can be reevaluated. Evaluation goes stale, found competent, and now that activates things again, and now you have to pivot. Like we always say, we're always pivoting, pivot a different direction now with the court. So it's definitely not an easy and straightforward process. There's definitely some pivots you have to take along the way and some challenges that you do have to work through. But at the end of the day, I mean, whatever it takes to protect the client's rights.
Yeah. And what do you think the best thing a loved one could do to notify the criminal defense attorney that there is a mental health issue?
Yeah, I think put the defense attorney on notice from the beginning, even if there hasn't been an evaluation or any formal diagnosis, whatever their observations are and whatever's triggering them to feel that there might be an issue. I want to know. I want to know, even if you think it's a maybe. I want to know because the maybe might be true. And that is something for us to, dig into and use from a defense standpoint. So whatever information, observations, and if they have had evaluations, medical records, what prescriptions they're currently under, things of that nature, all those things are tools that are very helpful to us.
The maybe might be true.
The maybe might be true.
I love it as a criminal defense attorney. I'm going to adopt that slogan.
The maybe might be true. Oh, we passing.
You do. You got some gold.
So thank you. It's so nice to have a specialist on the podcast to talk about that.
Thank you so much.
And so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up.
Yes.
This has been Badges to Briefcases. I've been your host, Attorney Brandon Gans, the wonderful attorney Danielle Padilla.
Thank you.
Make sure to follow us on all our socials, Gans_law, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.